how to calculate and adjust your macros. And calories. Macros, for those of you who don't know, are a lower level of calories or more breakdown of calories. Macros are carbs, proteins, and fats. Yeah, carbs, proteins, fats, sorry, and then those will go into, those combined to make up your total calorie intake. So what I want to kind of talk about here with you guys today is going to what's called a macro periodization, just the concept of it, okay? And you see I kind of just have a blueprint laid out here. This is it depends, all right? When it goes into nutrition, there's always it depends variables. There's several of them. But this just gives you an idea of how I work with someone, and when I'm prescribing macros for someone, this is the route that I go when I'm actually working with someone. One of the big things most people come to me for isn't necessarily this. I mean, it is this. It's more the adherence, the accountability, to a degree being a babysitter, to make sure that you are staying on top of it, because it doesn't matter if you know all this, if you're not actually holding yourself accountable and staying disciplined to it, it's never going to happen. So, when I'm working with someone, first thing we do when we're going to calculate your macros is weeks 1 to 1 or 2, we're trying to make tracking a habit. Track everything, so that way you get used to seeing what your intake is, you get used to putting it in there. You've also now saved in the database something that you're likely to come back and eat at some point. From there, we calculate your averages. I'll go over what that looks like here in a few. And then in the next few weeks, typically what I'll do is I don't change your calorie intake. More often than not, I get people geared at weight loss. I get some geared at weight gain. Same thing, I gotta get you used to a better balance first before I start adding or subtracting intake. So what I'm gonna do is if we're talking about weight loss, let's say you're eating an average of 2,000 calories a day, just throwing a ballpark number out there, but let's say you're only eating like 100 grams of protein a day when you really should be eating 2, right? What I'll do is I'll keep your calorie intake around 200, and I'm trying to adjust your protein to accommodate for that. If that's a really high spike for you, if you're normally eating 100, you're trying to jump to 200, you're talking about a double increase. So what I'll typically do is start someone out, we're progressing, maybe we're gonna start at 125 or 130. The goal would be to get you up around that 200 gram range. But that's what we're working with, is keeping you or starting to shift you into a better balance, but not necessarily adjusting your total intake. And then as I get into the next month, 2 months, 3 months, then I'm gonna start aiming a little more at the direction we're going. So whether I'm trying to add or subtract weight, it really depends. Again, there's a lot of variables that go into this. This is just a very blueprint look. But generally we're gonna adjust plus or minus 5 to 25% of your total calorie intake, and then that'll be distributed differently between carbs, proteins, and fats. And so if I'm trying to lose weight, a pretty average dip for me for someone's, we're gonna start somewhere in a 10-ish range, 10% range. So I'll subtract 10% of your total calories, recalculate out your macros. We'll adhere to those for somewhere between a 3 to 4 week window. We'll reassess again, usually in that 3 to 4 week window. We do it again, same thing. And then typically, depending on the person, I might take you 1 more month deeper depending on how low you went. If we have someone that's eating 2,000 calories a day, and I subtract 10% here, that takes them down to 180 or 1,800 calories. I subtract another, I'm down to about just over 1,600 calories now. From here, if I go much lower, I'm starting to put my body into that survival mode or that survival mechanism. I'm gonna start turning off my hormone balance. My sleep's probably gonna suffer, things of that nature. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna stay there for a bit, maybe give some refeed days in, planned refeed days in there, if you've earned them and you've stayed consistent and disciplined. But we'll stay in a maintenance phase so your body gets used to kind of that window and gets used to that body composition, see if we can't shed a few more pounds. And then what I would do is take you for about 2 to 3 months in the opposite direction. So if we were dieting and you went down to around that 1,600 calorie window, well now we would go into what's called a reverse diet. We're trying to keep your body weight relatively the same, but build your macro intake back up higher, your calorie intake up higher. So that way over the course of 3 months, if we can add in another 1,000 calories where you only gained maybe 1 or 2 pounds, now when we go to cut again, you have 3,000 calories or 2,800 calories to cut from rather than that 2,000 calorie range that we began with. If we are adding weight or trying to go up in weight, we can only do that for so long before we're gonna start adding too much excessive body fat. So then I maybe go to maintenance and then maybe jump back into some weight gain depending on the person. Maybe I would go into a micro cut or a 4-week cut, something to just bring body count back down a little bit. Again, there's a lot of it depends variables that go into it. But this is just kind of a blueprint and the idea of periodizing, planning out different seasons of your intake for your goals based upon the time of the year and where you're at in that goal. Because if we're working in a deficit, you cannot stay in a deficit the rest of your life. If you do, there's a lot of things that are gonna suffer and sacrifice from that. So, an example here, I went ahead and drew out just a really loose blueprint. Let's say this is, I kind of drew an example down here of someone let's say it's a 5'9" male, they're 225 pounds in their mid-40s. Their target weight's to get down to 175 and around 13% body fat. We'll say we're 26% now, right? So if I have him calculate out and figure out what that first week looks like, his total calorie intake comes out to be 14,445 over the course of 7 days. So I divide that by 7, and I get an average of 2,063 calories. So if you look here, there's nowhere in here, we're just up and down, a lot of inconsistencies through here, and then same thing across the board. So what I'll do is I take this number here, and I set a goal of protein first, right? Where are we at? Right here, set protein first. So for him, I see a couple days at 125, a couple days at 100, a couple days at 75, right? So trying to get him up to a 200 gram range, 175 range, might be a little excessive. This 150, probably a little excessive jump. I probably wouldn't do this too early, but if someone understands how to get protein in and supplementing a shake, maybe just enough to do that. Like, I want to get this closer to that 1 pound per gram of body weight as fast as possible, if not actually higher, even if I'm trying to lose weight. The thermic effect of food from protein, the balance of my blood sugar, they all have great, the satiating effects. Protein will help curb your appetite for longer. They all give a lot of positive effects, and it's going to help reduce that muscle tissue breakdown when we're in a deficit. So that way you can maintain a lot of that muscle tissue you've built and muscle tissue you have as we are cutting calories and your body is in that deficit eating away from the fuel you have within it. So, set that protein first. Then from there, divide your remaining calories between carbs and fats, kind of based upon the goal you want to achieve. This also is a little individual. Fats are going to have a little more dependence or affect your hormones a little bit more. A lot of our sex hormones are cholesterol-driven hormones, meaning they are derived from fat or cholesterol in the blood. In terms of a nervous system regulation or rebooting effect, carbohydrates are going to have some of the biggest impact. So, like, it depends on what our goals are, what I want to maybe favor in that. I do tend to like, I don't like the label of the zone diet, but the idea of somewhere around a 30% protein, given that falls around that range, and then 40 and 30 carbs and fats. But again, if I have someone that's more of an elite athlete or someone that's training and a very active job, I may actually be 45 to 50% carbohydrates, and I might only be 20 to 25% fats. Also, too, if I have someone that their calorie intake is 4,000 calories, that protein is probably only going to be 20% because there's so much more of an intake to get, and you don't need to go too excessive there. But I will prioritize protein first, and then we divvy up the rest. So if I prioritize protein with 150 grams, that was about 29% of that 2,063 calories. And so that left over 71% left, so I want to go around 40%, 206 in terms of carbs, 71 grams in terms of fats. With this, I wrote up here fiber. I didn't talk much about it in here, but your fiber should stay relatively consistent. Fiber is going to help regulate our digestion. It helps regulate our blood sugar levels a little bit better. It's also going to help curb your hunger, or creates that satiating effect a little bit better. And so fiber is something we want to try to stay consistent throughout any style we're at minimum, ideally in that 25 gram range, but pushing much over 40 is generally not going to cause some gastrointestinal discomfort as well, depending on the type of fiber you're eating. But then based upon what you do and where you go and the results you see, we always want to kind of come back and adjust our intake based on where we are in that 5 to 25% range, whether I want to go up or down. The big issue most people fall into is they're not consistent enough up front. If I don't make things a habit, it's not going to work. Typically, the body takes somewhere between 10, younger people or someone that's very fit, active, maybe even as early as 6 or 7 days for your body to start to adapt to a set point. So a new calorie intake here. However, someone that's older, more metabolic issues, you may be looking somewhere in that 20 to 24 day range, somewhere in that 2.5, 3 week window. So right around that 3 week window, I'm going to be able to gauge, did this add or subtraction work to here, and then do I need to make another adjustment based upon that? There's a lot of it depends variables that go into it, so that's why I do highly suggest you hire a coach who can help you look at this and take the data, the science aspect of it,